about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Hi there, hello, and welcome to our first politics live stream of 2022. So it's very nice to be here. I'm joined as usual by Kira, but she's joining me from somewhere in the UK this week rather than the sandy deserts of wherever you were before. I was going to say
Not
Nevada, and you weren't in
exciting.
Nevada at all. Arizona, there you go.
Yeah.
So is it how's
Millions.
it to be back in back in England? All right, not too cold. Yeah. Great to see so many of you joining us here today. Lots of people joining us live, and of course lots of more people watch us on catch up after the event. If you are watching live, we really encourage you to get involved in the proceedings. There'll be lots of activities coming up with lots of opportunities for you to get involved. If you're watching live, you can type your answers into the YouTube chat window, the live chat window. We can see those as well and can respond to what you've said. If you're watching on catch up, you won't be able to join in the live chat, but you can. The advantage is you can maybe pause the video, have a bit more time to think about some of the activities, etc. And of course, this will be available to watch again afterwards. And I've already seen a question in the chat window. How long will this be? About 30 minutes or so. Okay. So without further ado, we'll get going. So our topic today is the powers of the Prime Minister, and we've posed it as a sort of debate question, and that's what we're going to do for this term sessions. How powerful is the Prime Minister? It's the sort of thing you might be asked, and I guess very early on you'd want to make a bit of a judgment on that, wouldn't you, and pursue that through your answer. The Prime Minister is very powerful or isn't. we may be in a moment where we find out, really, mightn't we? Because will the Prime Minister survive the current crisis? If Boris Johnson does survive this current crisis, that would be indicative that the Prime Minister, is a powerful office. If he's brought down, that would indicate some limitations to the Prime Minister's powers. Shall we get cracking with the first activity? We're going to... Quite a lot of the activities today are going to be about the skills, going to be about the debate, but we'll start with a one that's more about the knowledge. Just check with a little bit of your knowledge about Prime Ministers. We have got on the screen for you, we're going to have an activity called Don't Draw the Short Straw. And what you're trying to do, you're going to see some things on the screen, and you're trying to find the third ranked item. Okay, and you can give yourself points on this. So if you find the third ranked item, you get the full 4 points. So shall we see what we mean, and you can make your choice based on that. So we've got 4 prime ministers on the screen. And what you've got to try and work out is how long they were Prime Minister for. And from that, work out which one was Prime Minister for the third longest. Okay, so we've got Theresa May, we've got Tony Blair, we've got David Cameron, and we've got Gordon Brown. Now, it might be from that you could work out which ones was there the longest. Might be able to work out which one was there the shortest. But can you work out which one was there the third longest? Says second to shortest. Is that the right? I think I'm putting that right. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have moved that. Never move that. It's just so I can see your comments. Lots of people are putting answers in. Lots of people are suggesting it might be Gordon Brown. In fact, loads and loads of people are saying it's Gordon Brown. That's an interesting one. No one suggested anyone else so
just
far.
not as Prime Minister.
It's all been Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown wasn't Prime Minister for very long, was he? He was Chancellor of the Exchequer for a very long time.
He said he'd do an election straight away, and then he didn't, and that
didn't quite do it straight away. So he did. Yeah, so he was in for a couple of years after Tony Blair resigned, and yes, as you say, he was originally going to suggested he'd have an early election, didn't, held on for the full length of time to the 2010 election. What about Theresa May? Of course, she came in after the EU referendum in 2016. She did survive an election, just. So began with a majority, then had a period of time leading a minority government. Shall we have a look? See whether we agree with the majority. A few people have come in with other suggestions now. A few people have suggested Theresa May. I've had one suggestion of David Cameron. Shall we have a look at the answer? It was, in fact, Theresa May would get you the 4 points. She was the third longest. She was there for 3 years and 11 days, whereas Gordon Brown, 2 years and 98 days. It was pretty close, really, wasn't it? It was about 13 days in it, so that's quite a tricky one, really. David Cameron was actually Prime Minister for a long time. You know, Tony Blair's one of our longest-serving Prime Ministers, and David Cameron's their second, not by such a long way. He was Prime Minister a long time, obviously 5 years as Prime Minister of the coalition government. But then he did have that majority for a little while before the European referendum, and then leaving at that point. From the point of view of the powers of the Prime Minister, obviously being in a long time would suggest perhaps a more powerful Prime Minister. A short tenure might suggest that those Prime Ministers had less power, perhaps. But it's interesting, David Cameron was in for a long time without his own party having a majority. Was David Cameron a powerful Prime Minister at that time? We could have a debate about that. I mean, he had with alongside the Liberal Democrats, obviously had a decent enough majority and was able to get most of his business through. And then, in fact, he had a majority and only lasted another year. So maybe having a strong majority isn't always a sign of being a powerful Prime Minister. I'm going to hand over to Kira now for the next activity, which is called the Connection Spinner.
Cool. Yeah, lots of new activities for this, so it's quite exciting. So what we're going to do for the connection spinner is we're going to think, okay, so the argument that we're looking at, how does that kind of connect to the factors that we're going to argue? So for the first one, we're going to say, okay, the argument is that the prime minister is powerful. So let's see like how that looks. So the prime minister is powerful, right? That's the argument. We have a very powerful prime minister in the UK putting forward that. And then we're going to think these are things along the outside of it are the kind of variables that lead to whether or not the prime minister is too powerful. And the random spinner is going to pick one of these variables. And what I want you to do in the chat is to essentially say what is the connection. So if it landed on a majority, how does a majority lead to a prime minister that is too powerful, for example? So let's have a spin and see what is the one that comes up for us. Okay, nice. Very suspenseful, actually. So opposition then, right? So in the chat, try and put down any sort of ideas that you have. Like, how can opposition either create a powerful prime minister or lead to a weak prime minister? So see any ideas that you have. Excellent scrutiny. Nice job, Kimmy. Okay, so things like if the opposition is powerful, they can scrutinize the executive or the prime minister very well through things. Perfect answer there, Zanya. So through things like prime minister's questions, right? So I guess, and committees as well, right? So when we're thinking about parliament, it's a whole thing other than just prime minister's questions. You also have select committees, and can they be effective in criticizing the prime minister too? Taylor said the opposition party can scrutinize the PM during PMQs, which can weaken their image, right? And we saw a really good example where Jeremy Corbyn questioned David Cameron over the cost of the universal credit line. So somebody ringing for help for universal credit would have to pay, I think it was something like £1 a minute. It was really excessive. And when Corbyn called him out in Prime Minister's questions, we saw that he actually had to reverse on that and change that. So that's a really good point raised there. So through Prime Minister's questions, and yes, exactly, Daisy can put themselves forward as an alternative government. So excellent, much better than my idea. So
I know this activity isn't for the counter argument, so it just occurred to me when you were giving that example of Corbyn and the the hotline. As part of the reason why we use that example is, of course, we can't think of many more, can we? Where policy was changed as a result of opposition's prime minister or anyone's prime minister's question. So, although the opposition can have this impact, perhaps they don't very often, really, even though in theory they could do. Shall we have a look at the ones you gave? There's some great answers there, aren't there? I thought some really good ones.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and effectively, this is a really important variable. Actually, the strength of the opposition can determine the prime minister's power, because if they can't put forward, as Daisy said, an alternative government, then effectively people don't know if there's an election who they would vote for. They'd rather kind of stick with the status quo. And we've seen the way that Boris Johnson has masterfully used the weakness of Labour to his own strength, saying things like, "You guys are just Captain Hindsight. You're criticizing me, but what would you do that would be any different?" and so forth. So he's really leaning on the weakness of the opposition to kind of make himself look better in the media. And the media is important in the strength of the prime minister, which we'll talk about kind of later on. So yeah, over to you, Duncan, for the next one.
I think we've got another.
It's actually me. Sorry.
First, yeah. I think we can spin the wheel again before we hand it back to me. Shall we have a look to see where it lands this time?
Yes. Okay. So, which one of these variables will pop up next?
Hopefully, it won't be opposition again.
Yeah. Okay. Events. Phew. Excellent. Now, events is a great one, and when you're talking about your PM and cabinet question or your executive question, you need to kind of talk about 3 prime ministers. And think about how each of those prime ministers kind of navigated events. And I think events can either be the making or the breaking of a prime minister. So let's see. Okay, so parties, excellent. So yeah, I mean, we've had the perfect example recently with Boris Johnson and his parties. And it's interesting because he's done a lot of things which are questionable, and we talked about it even last year when we were doing the news and the briefing of the news, and we saw that he was actually pretty untouchable. But it seems like this party that he's had and the date being so important has actually led to maybe potentially his demise as a leader. We will see. Um, Excellent as well. We've got some great things here talking about the Falklands War. And when we look at war, something like the Iraq War and the Falklands War, we actually saw that this kind of strengthened the power of the Prime Minister, because essentially it's harder to criticize the government when you're rallying around the flag in order to kind of fight for the country and so forth. Like Blair was said to have maybe a slight smile after September 11th because he knew domestically the Prime Minister was quite restrained, but in foreign policy, they could kind of do a lot more. And we saw him really strengthen the power of the Prime Minister there with the laws that even undermined human rights and things like that. So excellent.
Well, there's interesting people pointing out that, of course, the Iraq War ultimately limited the power of Tony Blair because it not had a knock on his popularity, etc., which would have been another place where the needle might have landed, isn't it? That of course, I think someone pointed out that Blair had no defeats in Parliament and before the Iraq War, and many of them afterwards, and so events, even the sorts of events where you think people will rally around, can, if it's controversial or it's unpopular, can certainly have that impact. I liked the one earlier saying work events.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get to a work event after this, actually.
That'd be really nice, So I think it's really, really important actually to see what happens with Boris Johnson. Is this kind of work event, the cheese and wine, whatever it was that they were up to, is that actually going to be enough to kind of bring him down? And we've seen that these things have brought down prime ministers in the past. And it's more so actually, it's the way that they handle the event, but it's not necessarily just about public opinion. It's about public opinion and the MP response to that. So we're seeing a lot of disunity around Boris Johnson. And is he going to have his party abandon him? And we're already seeing all of these stories coming out about the way that they use the whip towards blackmail and things like that. So is this his party kind of abandoning him because he's handled the event so badly? So let's just kind of watch this space on Boris Johnson. So now it really is your turn, Duncan.
It is, and we've got another new activity called the Evalue Wheel. What you're going to see on the screen is a line of argument about the powers of the Prime Minister and whether the Prime Minister is sufficiently powerful, too powerful. And we will then we'll get one of these possible lines of evaluation to come up on the wheel. So which will give us an opportunity to maybe give a counter argument or to add a bit of nuance, or to, when we're evaluating, we're really making a judgment, and these are things that might support our judgment or lead to us opposing our judgment to reach a different judgment. So let's have a look at the line of argument the student's going to make. The Prime Minister is too powerful due to their control of the House of Commons. Okay, so that is that's a line of argument the student might make. We want to sort of find something to either help us support that, or question it, or oppose it. Let's have a look at what line of argument we're going to deal with. It is depends on. What does it depend on? So the Prime Minister is too powerful due to their control of the House of Commons. Want to add a bit of nuance to this. Is this true? Is the Prime Minister too powerful because of their control of the House of Commons? What could we raise as possible questions about this? So lots of people saying it depends on the size of the majority. Okay, and I think that's a really good point. Yeah, it absolutely does depend on majority and party loyalty. Yeah, that's a good.
I feel like Daisy's seen this PowerPoint ahead, she's doing very well.
Yeah, she's seen the bit before. The party unity, opposition. Okay. The strength of the opposition or the role of the opposition might have an impact on this as well. If it's a minority government, absolutely. If we think about when Theresa May was Prime Minister, you wouldn't have said she was too powerful. She lost a lot of votes, both in Commons, particularly over Brexit, issues to do with Brexit, and in the Lords, which you could potentially talk about here as well. So not necessarily, because it's subject to the size of the opposition, and the legitimacy is provided by the electorate as they vote for the winning party. Okay, so if you feel that perhaps the party isn't doing what it was elected to do and there's public opposition, that might have an impact. And we've got people saying that there's lost that there, so I'm just reading some of your comments because there's so many, the really good ones. Struggled with a hung parliament. Loads and loads of really good. Strength of the cabinet might be, absolutely. So really good points there. Okay, and we have got lots and lots of comments. Some of them going off piste a little bit there. I saw a positive one. One supporting it, saying that yes, this is true because they can override Parliament as well, which it's good. But okay, so a couple of suggestions here, which are absolutely what you all said on the comments. This is true depending on the size of the Prime Minister's majority. So providing the Prime Minister has a large majority, then they do very much control the House of Commons. Again, another one on the condition that the Prime Minister has party unity. If there are big rebellions, like Tony Blair started to have after the Iraq War, well, including the vote on the Iraq War and then after the vote on the Iraq War, then the Prime Minister might not be able to have such control on the House of Commons, and then that starts to limit the powers of the Prime Minister. I think we've got another one of these Evalue Wheels coming up later, but I'm going to hand over to Kira now for the next couple of activities, starting with the stepping stones.
Cool, thank you. I liked what Don said as well. Like, it depends on the size of the majority too. And I think with this topic, you have to link to component 1, which I think you'll do quite naturally, but mentioning things like first past the post mostly does actually lead to a stable or a strong majority is a good argument to make. So it's having that evaluation of both sides, thinking about it before having your judgment, which is really good to see that you guys are doing that so well. So for this one, essentially what we're going to think about is not just about evaluation, but the chain of analysis as well. So we're going to have start off with an argument, and we need to think about, well, what are the steps, the analysis that we'll have before we come to our overall kind of judgment again, right? So let's have a look at the next slide then. So let's think, okay, what would our argument be? And it's going to be effectively like that the criteria or the variable of having a popular and charismatic prime minister greatly increases prime minister power. So if the prime minister is charismatic, we'll see that the prime minister is really powerful. So what I want to think about is, okay, why? What are the steps to that? How does a charismatic prime minister lead to increases in power? So we've got some good examples. So Blair is a good example, but what is it? Think about the analysis. So Blair, for example, was a popular and charismatic prime minister, but how did that mean that he was too powerful? Exactly, Dawn. Fantastic. Yeah. So having things like good media attention gives them more popularity in the media, especially if the media can report on them in terms of, in a kind of a positive way, talking about their speeches and things like that in a way that kind of appeals to the public, which gains more votes, has a larger majority. But even when they're in session, right, we have an elective dictatorship, and that we only actually get to have a say in politics every 5 years. So it's not necessarily about the election, although that's important in the long term. It's actually thinking about how does that increase their power during that term, right? So positive media attention means that they're favourable of the electorate, so they favour highly in the polls. And essentially the thing that MPs care about the most is being in power. So if they are in power, they tend to have a lot of support from their MPs. So it decreases the likelihood of MP dissent, which means they have less defeat. So Tony Blair had a huge majority, 179 seats, and he didn't experience his first defeat until 2005, right, which is a very long time, right? So exactly, they're more likely to vote in line with it. And we're getting great examples, like Boris Johnson has done a fantastic job with the media in the same way that Tony Blair did a good job. We also saw with Margaret Thatcher the way that she kind of used things like her handbag. She used like it was like a deliberate thing, like her having a handbag just to make this point of this powerful kind of headmistress was the kind of angle they were going down. So yeah, this kind of utilization of the media to create a positive image of the prime minister basically stops MPs from rebelling. As long as a prime minister can guarantee votes in an election, so like the by-elections that we saw with Boris Johnson earlier in the year, they will continue to effectively govern and thus be very powerful. Yeah, so yes, Joss, perfect. Theresa May really did bomb on this when she tried to do the dancing queen moment, and oh wow, she tried to lean into criticism, and it was sad. Thatcher on a tank as well. Yeah, fantastic, guys. Really good examples that you're using here. So it is important because it means that MPs will rally behind them, which means that they don't get public criticisms and so forth. So we're going to do another Evalue Wheel. I'm going to do this one this time, right? So let's see what the argument is. So the cabinet is important because it's a key limit to the power of the prime minister. So let's see what our wheel says about this. So what are we going to kind of argue? However, okay, fantastic, right? So, however, so is the cabinet actually a limit to the power of the prime minister? So put down maybe some counter arguments to that, like how is it that the cabinet doesn't actually limit prime minister power? So in theory, the cabinet is supposed to be collegiate. It's supposed to be the prime minister is the first among equals, and they're supposed to hold the prime minister account. But what is the alternative to that argument? Right. So excellent, as Kat said, the prime minister chooses his cabinet or her cabinet. So it's the power of patronage, right? The power to hire and fire. The prime minister, yeah, so they have, but there is, so that's true actually, that's a good point about a limit. There is a duty to balance it ideologically. So we saw with the fact that Tony Blair had to have someone like Gordon Brown in his cabinet, even though he undermined him constantly. Cabinet ministers want to stay in cabinet for their career, so they don't challenge them. Excellent. So they'll try not to disagree with them. The prime minister's power of patronage can reshuffle. So we see that a lot actually when a cabinet minister is too problematic for the prime minister, they will just effectively remove them, right? I love this point by Don again. So this point about this is a really clever thing that Tony Blair did where he had the sofa government. So he basically tried to make it so that decisions didn't happen inside cabinet, but breaking apart the cabinet, speaking to individual members, deciding on policy outside a cabinet, and then the actual cabinet, that sort of half an hour meeting, which is very short, just becomes a rubber stamp. He basically says, we've already decided this. We already agree on this. You just have to kind of nod your head. You nod your head, fantastic. You still have your job kind of thing. So when there's a powerful prime minister, they can remove the limits to power as well.
An interesting one on this, I was just thinking is, and I think someone mentioned it in the chat as well, that Margaret Thatcher was essentially eventually removed by the cabinet. The cabinet sort of the big figures in the cabinet came to see her one by one and told her it was time to go. And it's interesting that something similar hasn't happened yet. Someone might be watching this in 3 weeks' time, and it may have happened, but something similar hasn't happened yet with Boris Johnson. And so it's quite a good example of both sides of this, really, that the cabinet can have this role of essentially eventually removing a prime minister, but what maybe it depends on the cabinet. Margaret Thatcher had quite a few, big players, big beasts in that cabinet, and perhaps this cabinet, are more dependent on Johnson for their jobs in a way, and that there are fewer figures that would automatically be in someone else's cabinet, and that might be a factor in why they're not going in quietly having a word, that maybe the moment has come.
There's a lot of new MPs, I think, yeah. So this is
Mm,
a problem that, well, it's a strength for Johnson, right? They are a lot more dependent on him. And we
mm,
have seen the cabinet members trying to actually rally support for Johnson rather than actually staying silent. So
mm.
I think it might not be necessarily his cabinet that bring him down, which I think is going to be interesting. We'll kind of see what happens. But when he loses the cabinet, I think that's going to be more
Yeah.
difficult.
Someone also
Um,
mentioned that their cabinet's often their sort of breeding ground for future party leaders. I think that was William. And yeah, and I suppose that when you start to think the Prime Minister is reaching the end of their tenure, then people start jostling for position and wanting. So that on the one hand, they don't want to be the person that pushes them, but they do want to be seen as a potential next Prime Minister and all that kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
you've got to jump ship, otherwise you'll go down with it. And
mm,
it's not about the prime minister; it's about you ultimately, isn't it?
mm,
Um, yeah, and you're right. Rishi Sunak has been quite interestingly quiet on that as well, right? So
yes, less
yeah,
effusive than the others, definitely in his support.
yeah, others
Yeah.
haven't. Yeah, so we've put down as some of our answers, and you guys have said this brilliantly as well. So yes, they owe their career, so they have to kind of, in some ways, nod along just to kind of protect their role, especially if the prime minister is popular, and it seems like the prime minister is going to be there for a while. When it looks like that starts to get weak, then you start to see kind of a breakaway from that. They also shape the agenda, so they decide what's being discussed and how long for, and they can sometimes put something in at the end of the meeting with only a couple of minutes to discuss. So you end up just kind of saying yes or no very quickly, even though you have reservations as well. The other thing is, I think we actually didn't mention this one, is collective responsibility. So they
Hmm.
can disagree as much as they like in that half an hour, but outside of that, they are like, we love this policy. This policy is the best policy ever.
Or
So
they're meant to
that's quite
be. I tell you. Yeah,
yeah,
they're meant to.
maybe not 100%, but the principle, the
Yeah.
convention is kind of there. So they kind of have to publicly agree with it, so as not
Or
to
resign.
undermine
Mm,
or resign. Yeah, and
yeah.
then when that resignation happens, that is kind of clawing back the strength of the cabinet, which happened with May, right? She had that period of rapid resignations where
Yeah.
the cabinet was saying enough, and
Hmm.
they planned it so that it was over a few days rather than
Yeah.
all at once, so
Hmm.
that a new letter would come out. They do the television circuit and effectively just destabilize
Yeah.
her rule there. So
Okay.
yeah,
And I think we're on to the final activity. So you've been brilliant at all the sort of skills stuff. We've got a final little knowledge type activity here. It's my favourite one, so I always like to try and stick it in if I can. It's called Word Smash. If you're a fan of Richard Osman's House of Games, you'll have seen something very similar but not identical. The example on the screen is just to let you, if you haven't seen it before, just so you know what you're doing. The pictures of an elephant. The clue suggests Antarctica. You smash the two together to make Elephantarctica. In the ones that are coming up, obviously the clues will be to do with the Prime Minister or the powers of Prime Minister. A little bit of knowledge just to leave you with. So we've got a picture and we've got the clue, Labour's first Prime Minister. So can anyone smash these two together? We've got Keris, who's a Richard Osman House of Games fan in the chat, so I'm sure that's definitely a good start, because it's just getting your head around the smashing together can be slightly problematic. Basically, the end of the first word or the first phrase, or in this case a word, is the start of the second one. Also, Dan has gone for a former Labour Prime Minister, but actually not the first one. So it's not Clement Attlee. Clive has come into it. Taylor's had a good go, identified the right Prime Minister, but and yes, the few others have got them as well. It is Pramsey MacDonald. Pram and Ramsey MacDonald together make Pramsey MacDonald. Well done, those of you who got that one. Next one, I'm going to tell you that they are a particular type of potato, not just potatoes in general. So we've got some potatoes, and the Prime Minister from 1970 to 1974. We've had an idea on the thing. I'm afraid Tony Blair was not
Tony
Prime Minister
Blair.
between 70. I like the idea of Potato Blair. I should have gone for Potato Blair as one. That would have been a brilliant one. If I'd gone for 1997 to 2008, then Potato Blair would have been perfect.
Put that in the next one.
I see people have got who it is now. One person has. Clive's worked out the right Prime Minister. There we go. Yes. King Edward Heath, the King Edward's potatoes, King Edward spuds, and it was Edward Heath. Quite a few people going for Wilson. Someone said Rebel Wilson. I'm not sure where the potatoes come in with Rebel Wilson, but we could have done a Rebel. Yeah, that would have been an opportunity. It was Heath. Well done. A few people spotting it was Heath. No, King Edward might have been a little bit obscure. And then the last one, a convention that ensures all ministers support cabinet decisions. And we've got what's going on in that picture. Oh, I like the idea of Spudwood Heath. I've seen that.
Yeah, that was quite
Charles.
cool,
Yeah, nearly. Yeah. What's the picture? What's the so Don has identified the clue, and brilliant, well done, Joss. Click and collective responsibility. It is. It's a click and collect logo, and it was collective responsibility. Click and collective responsibility. I thought that one was potentially going to stump you, but you did brilliantly there. Okay, really good. And you've been brilliant in the chat window today. So many good suggestions, don't you think, Kira? That was a stellar performance by our live audience.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Thanks, guys. Yeah, it was really good answers.
So, and we've just about finished on time as well, so that was pretty good timing. So well done, everybody. Thank you very much. If you found this a useful session, please do click the thumbs up button, because that helps other students find these sessions. We're going to be doing them on a Monday afternoon over the next couple of weeks. So Kira's disappeared. If she reappears, I'll bring her back. So thank you all again very much for your for everything that you've said in the chat window. That's brilliant. We will be back joining you, as I say, next week with another debate. Kira's back.
Sorry, back.
Joining even quicker than next week. She's back now. And yeah, so thanks very much. As I say, thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thumbs up if you didn't. Someone else might do. Get your friends to watch it. Lots of other subjects doing these at the moment as well. So if you do sociology, history, business, economics, psychology, there are lots of these sessions available to use, and hopefully they'll be really useful coming up to mocks maybe at the moment, but also between now and the exams in the summer. So see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.